Hello everybody, welcome to my Comrades vlog series. So last week I recorded a run, I had some ideas while I was out on a run and recorded a video when I got back, standing out in the pouring rain that ended up being the prelude to the KZN floods. And today I'm going to start putting that together. I have gone off and saved some data or some GPS data and heart rate data and put it together in a way that I believe will be helpful in explaining to people how to tackle training to this very grueling event that is running through my veins. I am a chiropractor and have grown up in the area and lived in the area almost all my life. As a child, I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Ashburton, and on upruns we would go and visit them and stand on the side of the road there at Polly Shorts and watch a race unfold. And I remember watching Bruce Fordyce blow everybody way up there as a result of a successful race strategy, which is what I'm going to talk about. And then obviously I grew up my whole childhood and teenage life living in Pinetown, which Cowie's Hill is where he did that to a lot of people on the down run. So I saw a lot of that kind of unfold, and now I understand how he achieved that. I also am a lifelong endurance athlete. I was in a track squad when I was young and into high school, which had quite a high caliber of athletes in it, some of whom have World Championship gold medals. And you know, that is where I started my endurance training journey and have continued that through my life. I've done 17 doozy canoe marathons at a relatively competitive level, along with most of the other endurance river marathons around the country. I also have inherited my mother's Comrades number off her. She ran 6 Comrades in number 28756, which is my number, which I hope to make green one day. And I also have 3 aunts and uncles who've also run the race. So very much running through my blood. And over my life, I've accumulated a lot of knowledge, which I believe I can share. I've also helped a few aspiring gold medalists at the time to achieve their goals and get into the top 10. So hopefully I can share something with either some first timers or some people who just don't know that much about the race and might have figured out that they learned the hard way. I'm not going to try and reproduce what's already out there on the internet to do with endurance training programs. That information is very easy to access, and you can find it anywhere. It's not hard to write a training program or figure out what you need to do, but there are some specifics about the Comrades Marathon that I believe that I can share my knowledge with. So the first thing is, at the moment, it's the middle of April, right? And a lot of people are starting to think about Comrades Marathon, and that's entirely correct, but don't start too early. The human body, physiologically, we can only handle about 12 to 16 weeks, 16 weeks for a pro athlete, for an everyday Joe Soap with a recreational athlete with a job and whatever, that will come down to about 12, that you can handle really putting time, energy, effort, and focus on an event. The reason for that is our bodies kind of have a physiologically built-in coping mechanism, and if you push it too far, you're either going to get sick or injured. So rather keep to that build-up time, and yes, you can prepare in advance and give yourself kind of a springboard to jump off, but you don't really want to be starting your specific Comrades training with the new Comrades date until the beginning of June. Bruce Fordyce used to say that it didn't matter what he had been doing until the end of February, as long as he had a clean run in from the beginning of March. Remember, Comrades in his days was 31st of May. So that gave him March, April, and May in his specific build-up. And he ran, what he speaks about it and he writes about it, he ran what he believes is his best run, having had a hamstring niggle that bothered him and hampered his training and forced him to rest in the beginning of the year. and he could only really run properly after that, which was the start of March. And that gave him a record time, and he feels as well that that was his best run. And the reason I tell that story is not because it is correct. It is representative of what we know from sports medicine about endurance training. Even Olympic athletes, when they are building, they've got a 4-year cycle to work with. And they will generally take about 18 months relatively easier, and then use 2.5 years. And even that 2.5-year program, that they will break it into bite-sized chunks, which will be about 16 weeks at a time. And, they might need to work on certain weaknesses, and they'll structure that, and they'll use each consecutive training block with rest periods structured in between to build towards something like an Olympics. World champions, exactly the same. And you need to take those little rest breaks in between to allow all of your hormonal systems, your brain, your physical, your actual body, your muscles, ligaments, tendons, everything, just give them a bit of chance to recover, so that you can then launch off that, will recover, get stronger, and then go forward again. And yeah, so just don't start too early. In that regard, I also want to talk about when to qualify. So it's best to bear that in mind. There's a saying, Comrades is a selfish mistress. So if you put any focus on any other event in the lead up to Comrades, the chances are that it will affect you on Comrades Day to your detriment. With previous Comrades dates, with Comrades in June and Two Oceans at Easter, that's the best example to speak about. So there are many athletes who try to run to their potential, or they end up in a good position and try and run for a medal or go for a win at Two Oceans or something like that. And there are very few people who've won both events. Most of the time, if they have done so, it's because they are head and shoulders better than everybody else. If they're in a competitive situation, they end up having it paid to their detriment on Comrades Day. And that'll serve for any other event. So the qualifiers do go up until the end, into July. Please don't leave it that late. It's much better to get it out of the way. There are marathons happening all the time at the moment. There was a marathon in Durban last weekend, although it was in the pouring rain that led up to those floods. And that was the same run that I did. I ran that day also in the pouring rain, and ended up with 2 pairs of wet running shoes after a weekend of relatively steady rain, which was then followed by the Monday and Tuesday of very heavy rain, which caused the floods. But yeah, I'm going to do my qualifier early in May. I'm going to have a go. I'll have a 7-week build up. I've got quite a good training base after the KZN River Marathon season. I'm a relatively competitive paddler, and I'm pretty fit. I've just got to get the running mileage under my belt, so my heart and lungs are going pretty strong. Just got to get the legs going, and then try and get a decent time in as a qualifier. It's really not important to do PBs and things like that. Just put enough effort in to get yourself a decent batch, and then try and get that out of the way during the month of May, or at the very least early June. So if I've left it a little bit tight with 7 weeks to prepare for the one at the beginning of May, then I've also got one in the beginning of June, which, if May goes well, the one in June will become a long, slow training run, and I will slow right down and run very slowly. But if I do need another bite of the cherry, I do still have one in the bag there at the beginning of May. And the timing of either of those marathons will allow me a little bit of rest, and then it will allow me 12 weeks to focus on Comrades without having to worry about the fatigue that will come with putting effort in to an event in the lead up to Comrades. You really do want to avoid that. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Okay, right, let's move on now. Hope it works this time. I'm just going to share my screen and try and move on to my PowerPoint presentation here. So there it is. and I've got the Comrades profile up. So that is my down run profile from the last time I ran Comrades in 2018. That is the new route. So you can see there's a long run into Moses Mabhida Stadium there, much longer running than previous, with having to run the whole distance extra, about 2.5 kilometers along NMR Avenue, or it's now called Masabalala Yengwa Avenue, but nobody knows what you're talking about when you say that, to get all the way to Moses Mabhida Stadium. It took me, working on time, it took me an extra 15 minutes from where I would have turned into Kingsmead previously to then carry on running. So I have made a previous, in the lead up to the 2018 Comrades, I made a video about that. So if you keen to find out about that, just look up that video. It was very popular prior to the 2018 Comrades. In 2019, my wife ran, so I didn't run in 2019. And then since then, we've had 2 years off with COVID. And as I mentioned, I really am learning to do all these long runs and things over again, or it feels like I've gone back to being a novice. Specifically to do with Comrades, elevation gain and loss. So in the area, you can't avoid but go up and down. So on a down run, you have about 1,800 meters of elevation loss and 1,200 meters of elevation gain. Obviously, the gain is the more important part, although I will speak about the loss. But that's 150 meters of elevation gain per 10 kilometers. If you run on an up run, that's 1,800 meters up. That's 200 meters per 10 kilometers. And then you've obviously also got 1,200 meters down. So it is very, very undulating no matter which way you run, and you must introduce load in a way that your body is accustomed to that. If you come from another part of the globe, or you are from another part of the country, I remember running my first 2 oceans and being flabbergasted at how flat the first kind of 30 kilometers of the route was. I'd never run that flat in my life. But yeah, in KZN, that's just the way that the topography is. Unless you run straight up and down the beachfront in Durban or Umhlanga or whatever, you're just going to go up and down all the time. And in training, you should try and customize your body to that. Then the other thing is, being a very long ultra marathon, it's more than 2 marathons back to back. You must control your energy expenditure and your effort level in order to run to your potential, so that you can last the whole day. And you've got to train for that. You've got to get your metabolism geared for that. It's not like running a marathon or a 21 or anything like that. It's unique. So be aware of that. Then I just thought I'd talk about some of the features on the route. So those are obviously your 2 Polly's hills. Just notice most of these hills, even on the down run, they do have a backside to them. So at Polly's, you've still got 2 hills to climb there. You've got to get up to the top, and then you do run down. You don't really notice it because you're running in the dark in the morning, but yeah, there is a backside, and you are going to still climb. And you do need to be aware of that. And then the next one is obviously in Tonga. On the down run, the uphill is remarkably easier than when you run the other way. Next one is Bothas Hill. So Bothas Hill does have an upside. You are going to have to get up to the top of Bothas Hill. I'll speak about that a little bit. Then there's Fields Hill. Now, Fields Hill is the steepest gradient in the race. On an up run, it is a tremendously tough hill to climb up, 4 kilometers of pretty continuous steep uphill, followed by even more climbing. It's the only hill that does not have a backside. But on the down run, the reason it is significant is you've run a very long way, and it really is going to come with a lot of jarring impact, and you need to really look after yourself down there. Then Cowie's Hill, which is just the Durban side of Pinetown. Again, no matter which way you're running, it's a climb. And those are the 5 big hills in Comrades Marathon. But there are countless other hills that, and as I said, you are almost always running up or down. So here's some of the other significant points. That points to Omlas Road, which is the highest point in the race. That is the little hill. Particularly on the up run, there's a fairly long climb as you exiting Camperdown, and you can see it there on the profile. That hill there is in Cater Ridge area. So people call it Harrison Flats, but that name is a misnomer. No matter which way you run Harrison Flats, you climb, if you on the down run, you climb out of Cater Ridge, and then you descend towards Inchonga Caravan Park. And when you're running the other way, it's a climb and then a descent. So you can see there's a little blip there making a hill. Then these are these 3 climbs that I was talking about in relation to Botha's Hill. So I've only put 1 arrow there, but there really are 3 climbs. After you've gone out of Inchonga, you run through halfway, and then there are 3 significant climbs with short descents, which are pretty much back to back, 7.5 kilometers, which take you up to the top of Botha's Hill. They take it out of your legs. Then there's another little hill there, which is called Heartbreak Hill, which leads you to Hillcrest. The arrow that I put there is where Hillcrest is. And it's called Hillcrest because it is at the crest of a hill. That second arrow there is at Kloof, not any significant climb, but the reason I put that in is I want you to see there between Hillcrest and Kloof, just look at that. That is typical of Comrades topography. It is the gradient is continuous. Nobody speaks about it as a hill. Nobody mentions anything to do with it. No one talks about it being a climb, but just look at that. There's no mistaking it. You know, when you look at the profile, it's going to, on the down run, it's going to put a lot of pounding into your legs, and on the up run, it's going to take a lot of effort. Then that hill there is the kind of hill in Westville. So after you've come off down Cowie's Hill, you descend. In the main part of Westville, it's in a dip, the main section of Westville, and then you climb a little bit out of Westville. Then that hill there is 45th Cutting. The next one is the top of Tolgate. So, like, if you look at them on a route profile, those are definitely hills, but nobody talks about them at Comrades. And there are countless others. I haven't mentioned Fire Station Hill, for example. You're pretty much always going up and down on the Comrades route. And if you're taking this race seriously and you want to enjoy it and you want to run to your potential, you really need to be prepared for going up and down all the time. So you need to try and find training routes that match that. As I mentioned before, if you're on an up run, that's 150 meters of elevation gain per 10 kilometers. For a down run, that is 150 meters of elevation gain per 10 Ks. And for an up run, it's 200 meters per 10 kilometers. As I mentioned, if you live in anywhere near where I live in the Morningside area in Durban. It's not hard to find, but other areas and other kind of running cultures from other parts of the country and the world, they just don't go up and down as much as we do. Then in training, yeah, my advice is really long and steady climbs. So this is an elevation off one of my training runs. You can see it's not a particularly long run, but it does show a lot of gain and loss, and that the hills are a significant distance. You know, if you're going to be running up Fields Hill, that's 4 kilometers of continuous climbing. Cowie's Hill's 2.5, and that's a baby hill in comparison to the others. But because you pretty much are constantly going to be going up and down, you need to do hills that have very long, steady gradient. Here's an example of a training run of mine, that one that I made the other day, where I was standing in the pouring rain. This is the profile off that run. So you can see I do live on a hill and have to start either going up or down that hill. But what I did there is I ran to the Comrades route. It takes me about 4 kilometers to get to the Comrades route at 45th Cutting. I then ran out towards Pinetown and turned around on Cowie's and then came home. The important factor that I believe it helps me on Comrades Day, that one, is no matter which way you run the Comrades route, as I have shown you, you're going to do quite a bit of climbing in the beginning. Then it tends to kind of flatten out and undulate a little bit. And then at the end, you've got a lot of downhill. So this training route kind of mimics that. And particularly, and I like to do this very early in my kind of Comrades build up. And I haven't even started my Comrades build up, and I'm already doing these runs because I think that it really helps. Before your volume builds up too much, try and get your body accustomed to the elevation gain and loss that's going to come on Comrades Day. And get your body accustomed to climbing and descending and climbing and descending and climbing and descending. Then when you get to that really meaty part of your Comrades training, so when you're between 9 weeks and 3 weeks to go to Comrades, that's 6-week block. That's going to be where your mileage is really going to be building up. If you've become accustomed and you've introduced a type of load that goes up and down a lot, then you know you've got that in you, you know you're accustomed to that. You don't have to worry about introducing that at that time, and you can just introduce the mileage. So you kind of becoming accustomed to one variable at a time, and you can kind of put the focus on elevation gain and loss to the side a little bit, and you can focus on the mileage. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is when you are early in your training program, obviously your resistance to fatigue isn't that high. And it's kind of like simulates how you feel at the end of an ultra. So like this was a pretty tough run for me. It was only my second long run. And coming down these hills to get back home on the way home and enduring all of that impact, it really was pretty tough. And you've got to, yeah, you can really focus on being able to maintain your downhill running technique when you are fatigued, to keep your cadence up. And even if you have a good running technique, to tolerate that pounding that comes with running downhill. It's very important here not to overstride when you are running downhill, not to reach out in front with your foot. You've got to keep that impact point as close. It does go a little bit in front of being straight underneath your hip, but it's got to be as close to underneath your hip as possible. When you overstride and you reach that foot out in front of you, what ends up happening is, number one, you're braking. So you're slowing yourself down, and you then have to accelerate yourself again. And also because that foot is down out in front of you and your leg is extended, you have to lift yourself up. And that results in what we call vertical elevation. So it uses a lot of extra energy, adds a lot of impact, adds a lot of fatigue. So just that's a thing that I think is really specific to Comrades training that people need to be aware of. When you are running downhill, you've got to keep that impact point of your foot as close to being underneath your hip as possible, and then let your legs flail out behind you a little bit. And in order to keep your balance and keep a forward lean, keep your hips forward, and then you've got to, in order to keep your balance, you've really got to be able to get your legs through and keep your cadence up. It's not necessarily a high cadence, but it just means keeping your cadence up when you are fatigued, which takes a certain bit of practice and a little bit of knowledge. And if you do it properly, it actually minimizes the impact. So it improves your tolerance to fatigue. And running downhill, like on an ultra marathon like this, it's just like riding a jackhammer. It's all about impact resistance. And the better your technique is, and the more resistant you are, the better you're going to run at the end of the day. And bearing in mind the routes that you're running on with Comrades, you really are actually going to be able to make a lot of time up at the end of the day without really putting in much more running effort, if you can still run well by the time that you get to that point in the race. So I just wanted to put up this little graph here, same that the route profile that is on the screen. It's my data from the same day. So you can see my heart rate data there is in the maroon, keeping my heart rate really down, except for at the end where I ran up the hill to get home. And I was feeling strong enough to gun it a little bit, but I'll speak about that in another video. But the dots on the screen, those are my vertical elevation. And you can see while I'm climbing in the first half of the run, you can see I'm having to climb, I'm having to toe off, and you can see the trend in my vertical elevation comes down as I'm going through the run. So what I'm doing there is I'm really focusing on running downhill well. I'm not having to lift my body up. I'm keeping my cadence up. I'm also keeping my ground contact time relatively low, and I'm just trying to turn my legs over with minimal impact, land my feet as close to underneath my hips as possible, and just turn those legs over so that it's kind of like a high frequency jackhammer instead of having a really low frequency bouncing jackhammer. And what that does is it enables me to maintain my speed and run downhill with minimal impact and without having to increase my effort too much, which, yeah, it really does pay off if you can improve that or work on that as you're going towards Comrades. And I don't really think I've heard many trail runners speak about it quite a bit, but I haven't really heard as many people speaking about it in relation to Comrades. But that is something that I, being a canoeist, we run on trails all the time. And I do follow a couple of pretty knowledgeable trail runners, and that's where I've picked it up from. And hence I'm passing it on to you. So really important aspect, and well, it's relevant to all forms of running actually, because no matter what downhill you run, you want to do it efficiently so that you can spare up your effort for later in the race. But it's very, very relevant because of the type of profile that Comrades has, regardless of whether you're doing an up or a down run. That profile has that. And what I'm doing here with this profile is I'm getting that downhill in at the end of my run. So I'm becoming impact resistance when I am fatigued, and I'm practicing that downhill running fatigue technique when I am fatigued, which is all preparing me for Comrades Day. I used to, I have a lot easier access to a swimming pool now, but there have been in previous years, I did have to use the municipal pool that's close to my house quite a bit. I like to do swimming sessions as recovery sessions, and relative to where we live, it's quite near the bottom of a long, steady hill. And I used to tell my wife, sort of, I'll meet you there at a specific time. And then I would run over the top of the hill and then spend the last 2.5 Ks gliding down the hill, finish my session, meet my wife and kids at the municipal pool, quickly off with the running kit, on with the swimming kit, and then do a little swim session just to help with the recovery immediately afterwards, but also get that long downhill at the end of a long run as an added payoff. So yeah, it's something that if you can manipulate your routes a little bit and you can include it, it really will pay you off on Comrades Day. Right, so that's the end of the first one. I'll follow that up. I've got a whole lot more material that I'll share with you. But for now, I think that's enough to digest. And really, I think you should not be focusing too much on Comrades right now. It should be more marathon qualifier focused, and then try and get a little short rest period, but trying to customize your body to the demands that you're going to be facing on Comrades Day, bearing in mind the type of week profile that you're going to be dealing with. Okay, guys, I'll see you pretty soon.